What's going on, alpha males? Welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast, the podcast where we talk about what it means to be a man, the right way, strong, dominant, and in control. And I think part of being a strong, dominant alpha male is standing ready against evil, both spiritually and physically. Jesus told his disciples to have swords. Not figurative swords. I know that the sword of the Spirit is the Word of God, and I believe that's a much more powerful sword, but he told them to have literal, actual swords. So chew on that theologically for a while and be circumspect with yourself. Also, God's angels are mentioned as having swords. I would submit to you, there is nothing wrong with being a good, strong man and having the ability to stand up against evil. Today's topic is going to be along those lines. It's going to be about carrying a neck knife. Now, I'll be honest, I don't generally carry a neck knife for reasons I'll get into in the body of the topic. But I know that by God's grace, people listen to this podcast from all over the world, and I am truly humbled that anybody listens, let alone people from all over the world. I do a lot of stuff on guns and defense. I do a whole other podcast you might be aware of called Gunfighter Life. In fact, I do far more episodes of that than the Alpha Male Podcast. But that doesn't apply to everybody. Somebody, walking around the streets of Japan or France, surprisingly, quite a number of men, or I assume men, quite a number of people in France listen to the podcasts. So, and I'm not telling you this is legal for you where you are. In some places, even in America, it may be perfectly legal for you to carry a firearm, but illegal to carry a neck knife. It could be a felony. Yeah, that's a real thing. But there are also places where you may be perfectly able to carry a knife, and it may be your best line of defense, not like a secondary or a tertiary, but it may be your main go-to thing. And for that subset of men, or for men that maybe dress differently than I tend to, it may be a good, logical choice as a step up in a use of force continuum. It may be their highest level that they have access to as EDC, as everyday carry. Your home, likely you may have other choices. Even in your vehicle you may have other choices, but for everyday carry, which I know I'm big on that concept if you've listened for a while, this may be their best option, or your best option. Before we get into the bio and the topic, know that special announcement for the month of January in the year of our Lord 2023, there will be a Patreon giveaway. So if you become a patron this month, hopefully you'll do it mostly because you want to support the podcast and believe in the message, making godly men strong and strong men godly. If you want a little extra incentive, there'll be a giveaway. The new patrons will be entered in a raffle, and one will be chosen to receive not a neck knife, but a really good all-around fixed blade knife, an SOG bushcraft, and a good bailout bag for your readiness kit, let's call it. Anyway, with that, I've been experimenting on the bio. I put it in at the end for a while, or towards the end. I'm going to put it back in the beginning. I haven't got any feedback from you guys one way or the other, so if you have honest feedback, I'd love to hear it. goodshepherdtraining.com, goodshepherdtraining.com. Anyway, with that, I'm going to plug in the bio, and we'll get to the main topic afterwards. So, who am I? Who is this person talking to you from across the internet? Why should you listen? First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life, for I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion and West Coast Regional Rifle Champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Milito. Welcome to the podcast. Knives. Let's get into the main topic of neck knives. Why I don't generally carry one. While I've been doing this experiment, I have been carrying one quite a bit for you guys, the audience. I generally carry a fixed blade knife in my pocket. I carry it with an ulti clip, so it clips inside the pocket. It runs along the seam of my pants. It blends in very well, and one of the reasons I did that, for years and years, even during the war, I'd have a folding knife in my pocket. I'd have a bigger K-bar strapped to my chest or something, but I always have that folding knife in my pocket. When I was commanding a tactical team and messing around with ground fighting and things like that, and I didn't have a K-bar strapped to my chest, let's just say we get into some hand-to-hand stuff, and most fights end up on the ground. That's just a real thing, statistic, and in my personal life, I've noticed that to be true. Most fighting ends up on the ground. And could I get to a folding knife and unfold it and use it? Yeah, maybe. But there's a lot of steps in that. I have to get it out of my pocket, I have to unfold it, and then reacquire a different grip. Because if you think about how a folding knife works, then I have to grab it in a grip that allows for that blade to unfold. And then I have to reacquire a grip, which if somebody is fighting with me and trying to grab it out of my hands is a lot. May I be able to do that? Maybe. Maybe not. But if I can grab a fixed blade knife, which I usually carry on my weak side, meaning the side I'm not carrying a gun on, then I can certainly grab it. And that's all I have to do is grab it and use it. I don't have to reacquire a grip. I don't have to do this or that. I can literally just grab it and go. And ever since then, for a long time now, I've been carrying a fixed blade in my weak side pocket. That's generally what I do. If I go to somewhere that has some knife restriction, like when I was in Maryland, I have to use a folding knife. Yeah, it is what it is. I don't like it. I put it in the same place. It's not my favorite. I try to avoid those places most of the time. But in general, that's what I do. But I know the neck knife is a thing, and it has some real advantages. One of the reasons I don't generally carry a neck knife, I'll be honest, number one, I don't like crap hanging around my neck. I don't wear jewelry. I don't even generally wear my wedding band unless my wife asks me to or going out somewhere. Because if I'm not going to cheat on my wife, it's going to be by the grace and provision of God, not because I'm wearing some piece of plastic or metal. You won't find wedding rings anywhere in the Bible. But I love my wife. The wedding ring has nothing to do with it. I just don't like wearing jewelry or things on my neck, my wrist, my fingers. It's just not me. I don't like it. So I'll be honest with you there. Also, call me old school, but I generally tuck in my shirt. If I'm wearing a t-shirt, a tank top, I generally tuck my shirt in, which kind of negates the purpose of the neck knife. To use a neck knife most effectively, you kind of reach up, and you can reach up a big advantage with either hand underneath your shirt and grab the knife, and it's a good fixed blade knife. But if my shirt is tucked in, I can't do that. So what am I going to do? Pull my shirt out, untuck it, and grab the knife? That's a whole lot of extra time. At that point, I might be better with a folding knife in my pocket. So I generally tuck my shirt in, and you might say, well, you carry a gun, but I usually carry something, an outer garment, if it's wintertime, a jacket, a coat, over top of my tucked in shirt. If I'm, like I was, corporate management in a high class, multi-million-dollar corporation, I'll be wearing a 3-piece suit. I'll have my gun on my hip, and then I'll just put my suit coat and let it hang down over my knife and my gun. Or my sport jacket, depending on the style or whatever. If I'm in, let's say, southern Arizona where it's warm, I want long sleeves and stuff anyway to keep me cool. nice loose-fitting long-sleeve shirt, and what I'll generally do is tuck in my undershirt and wear a nice loose-fitting shirt over that that's not tucked in. If I'm somewhere like the Pacific Northwest, I will wear just like a normal flannel shirt to cover my gun and my knife. But anyway, that's how I dress, and I usually tuck in my shirt. But lately, I've been walking around for you guys with my shirt untucked quite a bit and carrying a neck knife. And I would, throughout the day, see how fast I could access it and how useful it might be. And I've been experimenting with a few. One I've had for a while, and I've carried it off and on. I want to say I've had it for a year or 2 years. I've had it for a while. I can't remember exactly when I got it, but I've had it a while. And I'm going to talk about 4 different neck knives. The first one is the Bone Tactical. A fairly small company. This is a fairly inexpensive knife, but I think out of all the ones that I've carried, it is the best defensive option. I think it's well thought out for defensive use. I think that it would be a good fighting knife. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to get into a knife fight. I don't want to get into a gunfight. I have seen enough death and violence in my day that I don't need to see. I would rather not see any more. How can I wax a little bit more poetic with that? As a man acquainted with violence, I can stomach it should the need arise, but I'd rather have a healthier diet. So I don't want to get into a knife fight, obviously, and I carry a gun. I didn't stop carrying a gun, as part of my EDC when I was doing this, but I carried the neck knife as an experiment, mostly for people that they're thinking about this as an option, or this may be their best option. That Bone Tactical knife, and it's called the EDC Relentless, and I have no affiliation with Bone Tactical. I have a few of their things, mostly their shirts, because I use them for concealed carry, and they work really well, but this EDC Relentless, I think, is well thought out. It's not a crazy expensive knife if you're expecting a Benchmade. It's not that. But for a good, practical neck knife that's, I think, well thought out for defensive use, it's ambidextrous, which is something I'll get into with the other knives that aren't. But this one is, you can grab it equally well, assuming you can fight equally well with right or left-handed. And it's symmetrical. And it's got a great handle. Like, it's got a handle that when I grab it, both the texture and the shape allows me the dexterity and sturdiness that I think that I would want in a fighting knife. Is it a U.S. Marine Corps K-bar? No. But you're not carrying a USMC K-bar around your neck as a neck knife. You carry it under your shirt, generally. That's the idea for these. I think most of the time, if you're in a permissive environment, like you're out camping or something and you want to carry one around your neck open, that's fine. But in general, day-to-day, I would say the overarching philosophy of use is you carry this under your t-shirt, under your whatever shirt. If you were wearing, like, maybe you would the kind of person that wears a dress shirt that's buttoned up and not tucked in. Anyway, underneath your outer layer, your jacket, you can reach up and grab this with either hand. And it's less important how it's oriented in your hand, because either way you can fight with it. The sheath is really, really well thought out. Now, it comes with a kind of a metallic chain that would, let's just say you'd have to dress far differently than me for that to fit in. All the knives I'm going to talk about today, whatever they came with, I put a piece of brown microcord. Brown microcord because it's a good size for this and it blends in with my skin tone. So if somebody sees the cord, they're just going to assume it's some other trinket or necklace or whatever. But they're less likely to even notice it. It's just a piece of microcord, which if you don't know is like a really, really thin, small, kind of 550 cord, but way smaller than that. But it came with like a metal chain, so if you dress in a way that you would be expected to see a metal chain, then it comes with a decent metal chain. I don't like to give prices, but this knife was not expensive, and I think even if it didn't come with the knife and you had to buy the knife separate, the sheath itself would be worth the cost of the knife. The sheath is a really good Kydex sheath, or Kydex is a brand name, but that same similar material that you'd use on a gun holster, it's a fantastic sheath. It gives you really good retention. I wouldn't, if I was wrestling around on the ground, I wouldn't be worried about this coming out, but also I can grab it and it's ready to go. And it's got a similar profile to a dagger, the kind of dagger that's been popular since before Roman times, like a puglio. It's a good fighting knife. You can use it forward grip, reverse grip, strong hand, weak hand, and it's Again, that handle, it's not expensive, it's not G10 or some kind of, Gucci material, but it's darn effective. A good, useful knife. Now, here's the downside to this design. This is a defensive knife. It's not that you can't use it as a letter opener or to open an Amazon box, but it, to me, screams less utility. But for a good defensive get-off-me knife, it's great. It's the biggest one on the list that's a designated neck knife. I'll get into what I do to my normal EDC knives at the end to make them a quasi-neck knife. But for a dedicated neck knife, this is the biggest one I have. And unless you're putting it like under a coat, probably the biggest one you could conceal. But again, Bone Tactical EDC Relentless, a really good knife. A really good defensive option as a neck knife. The next one I'm going to talk about is the smallest one. Well, yeah, the smallest one. Maybe not for blade size, but for overall weight and sleekness. It's the smallest one I'm going to talk about. And it is the SRKT Doug Ritter SRK Mark V. It's a tiny little knife. It wasn't, well, I guess the sheath lends itself to being a neck knife. I've had it for a long time. This is actually my second one. I don't know what happened in my first one, but it's a great design. And this is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. Like I said, it's quite a bit smaller than the EDC Relentless. It is by far nowhere near as good a defensive tool. In fact, I'd say it's probably less effective as a defensive tool than a good metal pen. Which, if you don't know, I've done whole episodes on improvised weapons, but it's a little bit of a step up in use of force. Now, it's a knife, so it certainly would be considered deadly force if you used it on someone, but it's not a great defensive tool. But kind of the inverse of the EDC Relentless, it is, I think, the best utility, just straight utility knife. It is a really good shape, and although I can only really get 2 fingers on it and my thumb behind it, if I was going to carry this all the time like that, I would make a little lanyard on the back out of 550 cord so I could wrap my other 2 fingers around it or through it. It would give me a little bit more of a handle. It's got a very classic blade style, like a miniature version of what you would see on like a traditional kind of do-it-all knife, that drop point style blade. Now, I wouldn't want to, but I could skin a deer with this, especially if I was judicious with my inserts and did the gutless method and made a small incision and went from the inside and avoided the hair. Because if you don't know, a little pro tip, the hair is what really dulls a knife skinning an animal, and also if you dig into bone when you're deboning. But if you know what you're doing, you can get a lot of cutting of meat done without dulling a knife. That said, you could do it with this. I mean, you could do it with rocks. Plenty of people in the past have done that, but it would probably be the best and beefiest utility knife. It's got a fairly thick blade for as small as it is, certainly thicker than the first knife we talked about, and it's shorter, so it's going to be stouter. So, very small. I noticed in this, and I wore these a lot at the gym this week, doing all kinds of different exercises. By far the most comfortable. So if you're looking for let's say you want to start EDCing a knife, you don't want a pocket knife, and you want a good, useful knife for just day-to-day tasks, and you want to start with the neck knife that's really unobtrusive, this is it. Even for me that doesn't like stuff on my neck, I barely noticed that it was there. Even working out. It kind of just sinks into the love rug, what I call my chest hair. It just kind of locks it in there in between my pecs when I'm working out doing stuff. Now, if I did a cartwheel or something, it would probably fall. But it's so light and handy that you really kind of forget you're wearing it. So if that's the goal and you want a good utilitarian knife, this Doug Ritter Mark V is a good knife. And even if you decide you don't want to do a neck knife, it will be good. This is kind of an ultra small utility knife. Let's say having a backup in a little bag or something. But it's kind of amazing how much utility you can get out of such a small knife, and I don't think I could design a more utilitarian knife this small. So there's that. Again, for defensive use, I'm going to call it a little bit of a step up, You kill somebody with it? Yeah, but I can kill somebody with my bare hands. Honestly, don't know that I would go for this unless I was trying to like break somebody's grip or they were choking me, something like that. I could see some utility there. But even doing strikes with this, I might honestly be better off barehanded. But it's a good utility knife. So again, I started with what I thought was the best fighting one and then the best utility. Now I'm going to talk about one that's kind of in the middle. And although it was designed for a completely different purpose, I think it's probably the best, ironically, if you want to get into both worlds. And that is the Cold Steel Bird and Trout Knife. Now, you're going to have to look this one up if you want to kind of get an idea of what it looks like. If I was going to describe it, I'd say it almost looks like a small steel arrow with a loop on the end. It's really sleek. It's really long, but it's really light and sleek. Now, the blade itself is maybe only 2 inches long, but depending on how you held this, you could shove it into something several inches. Because, again, it's basically a small blade on a bar of steel and then a loop at the end. It's really light, really sleek, but it is long. This to me was the second most comfortable one. Although it is long, it is quite sleek and very light. I even fell asleep with it on last night. My dog was having some issues, waking me up going out in the middle of the night, and I throw it on when I was going outside. And at one point I just literally forgot and woke up with it on to tell you how comfortable it is. Not as much so as the CRKT Mark V, but very comfortable. And this is the only one with a double retention sheath. If you were talking about it as like in a handgun world, it doesn't just have friction fit, meaning the other two, just the friction of the sheath itself held it in. This one has that, and it also has a locking mechanism. It has a paddle, almost like you would see on a tactical holster. And like many things Cold Steel does, it's not overly expensive and very well thought out and practical. So it's a very well thought out sheath, and if you want something with a little bit more positive retention, it goes in and clicks. It clicks in so that it gives you a little bit more positive retention. Now, to be fair, if you rip it really hard, it will come out, but a lot harder than the weight of that knife. Even if you were jumping off something or something like that, if you were panicked and getting your head beat on the side of a brick wall, which has been known to happen, right? You could grab it really hard and pull it out. But in general, you're meant to hit that paddle and it comes out. Again, where I started, I think it's the best crossover. It's called the Bird and Trout Knife. It's designed for processing small game, bird and trout. Obviously good for that purpose. I think better for utility purposes because it was designed for that. So it's obviously going to be better than that. Not as good as the EDC Relentless for just fighting, but far better than the Doug Ritter. Again, it's got a small blade, but if you choke down on it, and it's got a loop on the end, so you can loop a finger through it. And depending on which finger you want to loop through it, you can get quite a lot of penetration on that for a fighting knife. Also, if you want to grab it and loop your pinky through it, it would make it not impossible. I mean, somebody could break your arm and take it out. It would make it very hard to lose retention on that knife if you were conscious. And somebody's probably going to get cut real bad trying to take it out of your hand. Also, because of that loop, it's easy to spin depending on what kind of grip style you want on the knife. And it's still light and handy, if not long. And again, that's the Cold Steel Bird and Trout. This also is not a crazy expensive knife. In doing this experiment, the knives and stuff that I already had that I could adapt to a decent neck knife, because again, I don't plan on carrying a neck knife replacing my normal EDC fixed blade knife. But for some of you, this may be a good option. So I'm giving you some good, inexpensive places to start. There may be some of you out there that train with neck knives all the time and know far more about this than I do. Now, my wife has actually been carrying a neck knife for years, and that's the last one we're going to talk about today as a dedicated neck knife. And this is the Cold Steel Urban Pal. I've had a few of these over the years, give them out. They are a great defensive tool, especially for the person that's really not going to carry anything else. My wife takes this running. Yes, I know some of you are going to say she should carry a gun. She runs a lot. She runs marathons. She's got a half marathon coming up. She has tried in the little fanny pack kind of waist belt deals. She's tried it in the, whatever they're called, stretchy exercise pants. Even got her a much smaller, sleeker gun just to try that. But she hasn't found anything that she can really run hard. She's not going for a little stroll through the park. She's running, right, like marathons. Hasn't found anything that's comfortable like that. Now, I generally will run with a gun, but my wife's just not going to do it. So I'd rather her have something than nothing. And as much as I love my wife and I would like her to, she's probably not, owns guns and stuff and owns guns before I met her, but she's probably just not going to run with a gun. Biking's a different story, but just going out running, probably not. Also, my wife's probably not going to take a designated knife fighting training. Like, I've got a bit of knife fighting training. My wife doesn't. So this Cold Steel Urban Pal is something that I like, that I would carry tucked into a war belt. Not the exact Urban Pal, but a push dagger. It is a push dagger. If you're not familiar with the design, it's not like a conventional knife. It's got a T-handle. You grab it in between your 4 fingers. I guess you could grab it between your first and second if you wanted to. I grab it between those two. There are other designs that you can grab between the first and second finger. But that's how it's designed, and it's very intuitive because you reach up and grab it between your fingers. It's ambidextrous. You can grab it with either hand, and you literally just punch with it. So if you're effective at punching and fighting, which is pretty intuitive, you're basically just leveling up on your punching ability. I like that. That's the reason I carried one in my war belt, tucked in, camouflaged in, so that if I had to get somebody off me, I could literally just grab it and start punching and get to my gun. I like push daggers. This little one, the Cold Steel Urban Pal, it's nasty. It's not the biggest knife in the world. It's got a fairly small blade, but if you're punching somebody, especially in the throat, face, or sawing back and forth on their armor if they're trying to choke you, it would be quite effective. Like the little Doug Ritter, I said it might have some defensive utility. This, although it's even smaller blade size, the design of it makes it a far better fighting implement. Is it as good as the EDC Relentless? No. It's a lot smaller, and it's, I would consider, a good step up in defensive capability. And again, that's the Cold Steel Urban Pal. My wife has, again, run with this for a long time. They make ones with, they make the Urban Pal, they make bigger ones, they even make polymer ones. For whatever reason you wanted a polymer option, and I'll leave that up to you. If it's just for this purpose, get off me. Still keep the stabbing capability. The cutting blade's probably not going to be very good, but the stabbing ability is probably going to be there with the polymers that they use. In fact, the one in my war belt is a polymer one because it's light, and it's literally there for pretty much one purpose: get off me right now. I have other options in my pocket and throughout the war belt. It's literally for a just get off me implement. I grab it and I punch with it. So they do make polymer ones. They make them in all different size ranges. They make them so big that you probably wouldn't want to carry them as a neck knife. But the EDC Urban Pal, for somebody that wants a decent defensive option but super small, it does have a fairly fat handle. So if that bothered you for concealed carry, just take a bastard file, duct tape it into the sheath, and run the filet over it until you get the profile that you want to make that grip slim enough. It's literally just some kind of rubber or plastic, so you could make it slimmer if you wanted to, or slimmer on one side if the side that was going to stick up. But even if somebody saw an outline or the corners of it, they would probably just assume it was a piece of jewelry. But a good defensive option, you could go a little bit bigger. In fact, you could go quite a bit bigger and still conceal it, I think. And again, Cold Steel and other companies make all different manner of push daggers. If you're getting started into this, you might start with the Urban Pal and decide you want a bigger one, and it's always good to have a smaller option if you want to go crazy concealed. Now, I mentioned in the beginning, I generally EDC carry a fixed blade knife, and I've done whole things on the way I modify my EDC knives. I put different things on there. There's generally 3 different ones that I switch back and forth between depending on what I'm doing. I'll generally have a ferrocerium rod, a way to start a fire. I'll have some water purification tablets on there, a fish hook and some line wrapped around there because it doesn't take up much space. I'll have some micro cord wrapped around the bottom of the sheath. That's there just in case I need extra cordage. I can attach it to the fishing line, make a trot line, whatever. It's also there, and it's the right length, and it already has a loop in it so that I can unravel it and throw it around my neck. If you've listened for any length of time, you'll know that my wife live as neo-nomads. A lot of times we'll spend big chunks off-grid in the wilderness. Part of that is staying clean in the wilderness, and a lot of that literally is bathing in creeks, in rivers. And if I'm literally unclothed, I can still take my EDC knife and throw it around my neck. I have something. So if you do EDC carry a knife, you may consider that. I don't know how well it will work on a folding knife. Maybe you just have a loop micro cord that you can throw around your neck and then clip that onto it if you're doing something like that. Also, I've heard of people doing that with the Mora knives, which is a great bushcrafting knife. I don't know why they wouldn't just carry it on their belt. Maybe some people don't like belts. I don't know. I generally wear a belt. Again, I'm old school. It would be weird to me to really not wear a belt day to day. Plus, where do I hang my gun? But it is an option for like a woman that's going to be wearing a sundress or something like that, right? It's an option. And again, if you're talking about a fighting option and you don't have a gun, a neck knife, especially in an area where it might be illegal also to have a fixed blade knife on your belt or something, having a neck knife may be your best option. And it has a lot of advantages. And a lot of fights end up on the ground. And a lot of times you're in that, you might know it as like a ground guard position where you're laying on your back and your feet are up and your hands are up guarding your face and your legs are up guarding your body. A lot of times you can end up like that, no matter how good a fighter you are. And having something underneath your shirt you can access with each hand, that's a decent option, and definitely better than nothing. So to do a recap, Bone Tactical EDC Relentless, probably the biggest I would consider practical, at least for me, for a neck knife. It's also the best defensive option, well thought out, ambidextrous, good retention, good sheath. The Doug Ritter, probably the best utility knife and easiest to carry. Not great for defense, but maybe useful for that purpose. The Cold Steel Bird and Trout knife. Good. Probably the best balance of both utility for doing normal tasks, what I would normal for me, gutting small game and cleaning fish and stuff like that. And also a good fighting option. Not ambidextrous, but a really good balance of both. And then a really good ultra small push dagger option, the Cold Steel Urban Pal. There are a ton of other options as far as neck knives go. I don't have a lot of knives. I don't have a lot of guns. I mean, maybe more than some of you, but I certainly wouldn't consider myself a knife or gun collector. There are a lot of neck knives out there. I mostly did this as an experiment for you guys. I have a bit of knife fighting experience, at least in training, by God's grace, more than most, thankfully, and hopefully I'll never have to use that in real life, in a life or death situation. Just as much as I know about the topic of conflict, I think it is a useful tool, and I don't plan on switching to it. I had to have something completely concealed and a knife was my only option. It may be the best option. And again, for you, depending on laws or how you dress or just willingness or ability to have a gun, perhaps for you it's the best option. For the tactical verse of the day, there are so many good ones. I'm going to list off a few. Psalm 144. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Some parts of Psalm 18. For by you I can run against a troop. By my God I can leap over a wall. It is God who arms me with strength and makes my way perfect. You make my feet like the feet of a deer and set me on high places. You teach my hands to make war, so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. Luke 22. And he said to them, But now whoever has a money belt is to take it along, likewise also a bag. And whoever has no sword is to sell his cloak and buy one. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.